Hi everybody, I'm Chris Sims from ComicsAlliance.com, and this is Here's the Thing. And today we're going to talk about the best single-issue story of all time. Now, there's a lot of competition for that title in comics, but to be honest, a lot of what we consider to be great single issues are actually part of larger story arcs. Amazing Spider-Man number 33, the final chapter. I'd say that's the single best Marvel comic ever printed, but as the title implies, it's actually part of a larger story. Watchmen number 5 is another one that people always bring up as a great single issue, and it's true, it's a masterpiece of layout and design. The center spread of Ozymandias attacking the assassin makes a big X, and everything on either side of that is laid out symmetrically. Since the issue is about Rorschach, who's about mirroring himself, it really underscores things thematically, and even provides a false midpoint for the series that throws suspicion away from Ozymandias as the villain. It's great, do not get me wrong. But Watchmen isn't about single issues. Watchmen is a 12-issue story. So when you're talking about the best single-issue stories of all time, there's only one that I always go to. Impulse number 3. And yeah, my copy is signed by Mark Waid. It's not a big deal. We're just kind of best friends. Or people who have been to the same comic book convention at the same time. That's not really the point. The point is it's a great issue. And here's why. I've always really liked teenage superheroes. And I think it's because teenagers and superheroes go together really well thematically. When you're a teenager, everything that happens to you feels like it's super important. Everything feels like the end of the world. You're dealing with new stuff all the time. You're not sure how to figure out what's going on. So everything you're going through feels like it's the end of the world. Meanwhile, superheroes are literally dealing with life and death, end of the world situations all the time. It's all they do. So when you have teenage superheroes like Spider-Man, who redefined the genre, and like all the characters that came after Spider-Man, Blue Beetle, Nova, Speedball, even Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that's a big one that Spider-Man influenced. All those characters are sort of dealing with teenage problems that are underscoring the superheroic problems they're dealing with in their other identities. So you have these teenage superheroes that are dealing with these literal life and death situations. You have a teenage audience that's dealing with what they feel like are life and death situations, which they're not. Nobody cares about high school once it's over. That's a hot tip for all you kids out there. But those things come together really well. It makes the characters and the audience easy to relate to each other. They work in a way that grown-up superheroes don't always do, even though grown-up superheroes provide that escapist fantasy on another level. Teenage superheroes work really well because of that. But here's the thing. What Mark Waid and Humberto Ramos do in Impulse number 3 is underscore that in a completely different way. They flip it around so that the superhero problems become the teenage problems. Here's how. If you're not familiar with Impulse, he's one of the best characters in an era when DC Comics was cranking out great characters all the time. Characters like Starman and Hitman. Characters like Superboy, who had really just come to prominence the previous year with the death of Superman and was being defined in his own series. Tim Drake, Young Justice as a book. That was something that got a lot of people into comics because they were bringing in new characters and making them very easy to relate to. And it's important to note that a lot of those were younger characters as well. Young Justice, obviously, but Starman, he was a just out of college guy, a guy in his 20s who was fixated on the past, like a lot of comics readers in the 90s. So you get to Impulse. And his origin story is a little complex if you're not familiar with The Flash, but the short version is that he's the Flash's grandson from the future who comes back to the past. Now, the problem with Bart Allen was that he aged super quickly because he had his grandfather's super speed powers that were uncontrolled. So in the span of 5 years, he ages 15, and in order to keep up with that, he's raised in a virtual reality environment. He's essentially a kid raised by video games, that big metaphor that everybody was so paranoid about in the 90s because things were getting more violent and Doom was going to make you go out and start robbing banks. But it gives Impulse a very unique strategy for dealing with things. Life and death situations where he's a superhero don't really bother him because he sees it all as a video game. His perception is that he's just playing a game that he needs to score points, and the way he scores points is by fighting crime. It's a really cool setup, but what it does is it puts the focus of the problems onto his civilian life as Bart Allen. So in Impulse number 3, that really comes to the forefront. The problems in this issue, the problems that he has to solve through superheroics, are going to school, doing homework, and making friends. That's it. That's what he does in this issue, and it's great, because it's dealing with regular teenage problems with superheroics, and it's showing it how good that would be if you had those powers. Bart Allen is assigned to write a report about France in this issue. He has super speed. He can run across oceans. He goes to France on his lunch break and writes a report about it. How great would that have been when you were in high school to be able to do that? The other thing, he gets bullied by these jocks who are trying to keep him from getting in the school. Super speed, runs right by him. Goes to gym class where they're playing dodgeball. They can't lay a finger on him because he's too fast. He gets the better of them at every turn. But what he does in applying superheroic techniques to solve real-world problems, is that he ramps up those real-world problems to a superheroic level. Over the course of this issue, Bart Allen pisses off everybody in the school. He gets into a fight with the rest of the student body. The climax of this issue involves everyone in the school on the football field trying to fight Bart Allen. And they can't, because again, he doesn't see that as a problem. It's something that he's observing as an outsider. Now, the thing that this does, it provides a foundation. It shows you how alien he is in this situation. That something that would be terrifying for any of us, not being able to make any friends, having to deal with an entire school that wanted to beat you up. That's a horrible thing to happen. But for Bart Allen, it's just Tuesday. And at the same time, it's also really optimistic. It's not as much of a downer as you might expect from a kid who goes to school and has to make friends and ends up pissing everybody off. Because at the end of the issue, there's always tomorrow. He's always going to have another chance. And again, I think that comes from the idea of video games. If you mess up in a video game, you have another life. You get another chance. That's how Bart Allen sees things. That's not exactly a realistic view. People at your school aren't just going to forgive what you did yesterday because it's a new day. But for him, there is another chance, and he does take that chance, and he does become accepted in school. He ends up becoming one of the coolest kids in school over the course of that run, and it's actually pretty cool to see that when you're starting from an issue like this. It's a great comic. I honestly think this should be studied by anyone who wants to make comics, because it provides an interesting take on very familiar situations. That's something that comics need to do. We've got familiar situations from our own lives, but we also have familiar situations from reading comics all the time. How often have you seen Batman in a death trap? How often have you seen the Joker kill somebody? Those are very familiar situations. If you can find a way to put a twist on those, you've got something new. And that's exactly what Impulse number 3 does. It's got a twist on going to school. It's got a twist on Kid Flash, which is a franchise that goes back to 1955. This is 40 years later, and they're still doing new stuff with it. It feels fresh even today. Even as a comic that was coming out in the mid-90s, almost 20 years later, it feels like that could be on the rack right now. So, if you're looking for a great single issue, I would say the greatest issue of all time, check out Impulse number 3, Mark Waid and Humberto Ramos. It's probably available digitally. We'll check that out on Comixology.com. Otherwise, hit your store's back issue bins. It's in there, I'm sure. And if you see Mark Waid at a convention, don't get him to sign it, because, like I said, we're best friends, and that's something special between us. That does it for this week's conversation about the best single issue of all time. But here's the thing, we'll be back next week with another episode where I'll be talking about something else. If you've got a suggestion for a topic, or if you want to ask a viewer question, hit me up on Twitter @TheISB, and make sure to check out ComicsAlliance.com, your source for the best in comics news, opinion, and commentary. Have a good week, everybody.